Kia ora koutou, Markie here. So you may hear some background noise, which is a combination of cicadas, because it's the full season for cicadas now, so you hear kind of probably come across as a hiss. They seem to make two noises. They seem to make this high-pitched noise and also kind of almost like a lower-pitched clicking noise. Amazing little things. They actually live underground as grubs for about 7 years and then come up for a brief season where they mainly get eaten by things. And then that's their life. It's quite fascinating, isn't it? And also birdsong, which is kind of really nice. So we're in the bush, or just outside of the bush. So yeah, surrounded by nature. Okay, which will make a sharp contrast to the topic, which is, so I finally got around to reading Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. I thought I'd read it, but what I realised is, and this is years ago, and what I realised is I read a heavily abridged version, so now I finally read the whole thing. I say read, did it as an audio book. There's a couple of versions of free audio books on YouTube. If you want to have the same experience, it was very well narrated. The version that I listened to, although when it came to kind of character parts, for some reason the narrator kind of made them all sound Welsh, which is kind of interesting. So, Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. So I mentioned Aldous Huxley and this particular book in another video I did on reviewing the film Midsummer. I probably also referred to Aldous Huxley in maybe some other videos. I don't know. He's somebody that I do refer to, particularly in terms of the Doors of Perception. So Doors of Perception is a non-fiction piece that he wrote based on a psychedelic experience that he had. Sorry, something's landed on me. That's why I'm distracted. It's a little kind of baby moth. I'm really in the wilds of it today. But I won't get distracted into that now, much as I could, and much as I like talking about that. So, I probably talked about that on one of the more kind of paranormal videos that I do, because that's where that kind of comes in. Brave New World. Okay, so Brave New World is a novel. There will be spoilers in this. It's often described as a dystopian novel, but I think that's wrong. Actually, it's a utopian novel, I would say. So it's something that's set in the future. In a world vastly different to, well, some would say not so vastly different to the one that we live in today, where basically everybody is happy through a number of things, So this was written in 1931. So, we're talking kind of the birth of early days of behavioural psychology. So behavioural psychology is not necessarily it's not psychology that's about behaviour, because all psychology is about behaviour, but behavioural psychology is a school of psychology where it was a kind of, it started off almost as a reaction against Freud and psychoanalysis, which was a lot about introspection and a lot about theory of the dynamics and the inner workings of the mind. And the behaviourist school of psychology basically said that that's not reliable. We can only work with things that are observable. So behavioural psychology started off kind of really with Pavlov's dogs, and it was a lot of stuff around animal experiments to see how animals would behave in certain situations, and experimenting with conditioning animals. In other words, creating circumstances where you could, through a kind of brief or medium-term intervention, you can actually change the behaviour, the ongoing behaviour of animals. And then they realised it applied to people, and they used it for therapy. And if you have CBT, the B in CBT stands for behavioural. So so this stuff's still practiced today and still very much in vogue today. But it's become it's embraced a number of other psychological concepts, and it's something much broader. But it still has this kind of dislike, really, of too much theory, too much introspection, and much more about kind of what's observable, what's measurable, based on that. And that's something I could go off on a wild tangent about that, really. So, and that's included in this novel. Okay, so the novel, and there are going to be spoilers in this. There's always spoilers in my reviews, because I always think that this is aimed at people who've read the book and would enjoy hearing other views about it, which is what I always do. I love reading and watching reviews after I've watched a film or read a book. So people say it's dystopian, but I would say it's utopian. But really, I think if you had to write a novel to answer the question, the classic, you may not have heard of this, the classic kind of thought experiment question. I'll ask yourself this, okay? Would you rather be a contented pig or a tortured philosopher? Okay, a contented pig or a tortured philosopher. Okay, tell me your answer in the comments. Tell me why as well. So really, if you're going to ask someone to write a novel that answers this question, this would be it. Okay, so I think it's very existential. I think it kind of asks a lot of questions about what is the purpose. Is there a purpose in humanity? Why are we here? What's important? What's not important? What do we place value on? And all those things really. I think it really is like it's really, to me it's a philosophical analogy, and this is how wrong I was really, because I thought this isn't predictive. This isn't somebody saying I can see this is the way that the world is going. This is purely written as a kind of a way of illustrating and making certain points. But how wrong I was. Aldous Huxley actually believed that we were well on the way to this kind of world. So what kind of world are we talking about here, Markie? You haven't explained it. So Brave New World is set in a future world where there is no such thing as natural procreation, or certainly in the civilized areas. Okay, so there are civilized parts of the world, and there are parts of the world which are deemed uncivilized and have become reserves. You can go and kind of visit them and look at how quaint the people are there, and the people are referred to as savages. But the Western world, and it's kind of set in Britain, is civilized. And what civilized kind of means is that there's no natural procreation anymore. It's all kind of done in test tubes, and people are effectively genetically engineered. This is before genetic engineering was a thing, really, but they're kind of genetically engineered, or pre-selected, perhaps is a better word, for different roles in society. So you have different grades of human being, and they use the Greek alphabet. So they start with the alphas, are the kind of the highest, most independent, most intelligent, and then you go down to epsilons, semi-morons, that do very kind of menial tasks. And it's a world with very different values. So the whole idea of parenting is seen as something that's absolutely disgusting. It's they use the word like pornographic and things to describe natural procreation. Words like mother and father are practically swear words. So not only are people kind of pre-selected biologically and genetically, but they're conditioned according to their role in life. And the whole novel starts with going around a plant where this kind of thing is done. It's all very industrial. It's described in a very industrial way. So people are kind of programmed to have aversions. So, for example, certain grades are programmed to have aversions to things like books and flowers, because they're supposed to do very menial mechanical tasks, and you don't want them getting an interest in education or aesthetics. So some of the conditioning is quite harsh, things like electric shocks and stuff like that, and some of it is reward based. So, and also people are effectively hypnotized. So as they sleep, certain phrases are repeated through speakers over and over, so that people get programmed in their sleep with certain often rhyming phrases. And there's a lot of black humour in this, so the phrases are often quite, they're in little kind of rhyming couplets, and they're quite kind of humorous. There's a lot of dark humour in the book. So the way the story unravels, and really to me it's, I don't know, it just feels more, again, it doesn't really feel like a novel, that has the balance of characters, plot, setting. It does feel more like a means to explain an idea. So the characters, to me, although they're real characters and they do stuff, and do things that characters do in novels. They feel, even, I suppose maybe in all novels the characters are kind of foils. It does feel to me more, they feel more like kind of tools towards an exposition. And I guess but the fact that the characters are kind of, created very much with a single purpose in mind is very fitting, really, with the whole nature of the society that's described in the book. So there's not a whole bunch of characters, and I would say nearly all of them are dislikable, which is interesting. So the key characters in the book are people who are, there are two characters that are misfits, who for some reason the programming or the biology, the biological preparation hasn't quite worked. So therefore they feel like outsiders in this society, and they're kind of questioning it. And then what happens is they go to, one of these characters that feels like a misfit goes on holiday to a reserve, what they call a reserve, which is where you can kind of see real people, but they become much more, I don't like the word primitive, that's a word that lots of people would probably use, but I strongly object to that. I would say they become much more atavistic, much more ritualized, in a way that a lot of indigenous societies are. So they go to Mexico, but it's not like the Mexico that we would experience today. It's the Mexico where everyone is, where there's lots of ceremony. It's much more of a traditional kind of way of life. And the characters that go there have a mixed reaction to what they see. And they do see some quite kind of brutal tribal ceremonies. So you get this really sharp contrast between this sterile, civilized society, and sterile is one of the words that they use. People are sterile, as in the bulk of the women have been sterilized, and also it's a society where disease has been more or less eradicated, so it's sterile on that level, and it's sterile in a level that most culture has been purged and replaced with something much more bland and banal. And emotions pretty much have been sterilized. So people are actually, prescribed and allotted a certain amount of a medication called soma, which is just a very effective drug with minimal side effects, which will make you happy. And if you take a lot of it, it kind of knocks you out in a very nice way. If you take a little bit, it kind of, so if you feel any kind of unpleasant emotion, the whole kind of culture of the society is that quick, take some soma, get rid of that, because we don't like that. So that's one of the ways that that's dealt with. So, and it's got very different values. So individuality is very much frowned upon, and they don't want people to be on their own. They want people to be with somebody, but they don't like families. They don't like exclusive relationships. So promiscuity is strongly encouraged. There's various kinds of kind of leisure pursuits that are encouraged, and everything is kind of made nice, and even there are kind of devices that emit kind of fragrances all the time. So it's a fragranced world, so it's very, very sterile, very what's the word really? There's lots of good words that I could use, but none of them are coming to me right now. But everybody is happy apart from these one or two kind of misfit characters who we kind of follow. The reason it's called Brave New World, it's kind of, I think a number of reasons why it's called Brave New World, but the actual origin of it is that there's a character, when this misfit character goes out to Mexico to visit this reserve, he watches ceremonies and stuff, and he meets somebody that looks very different to all the other people in that culture. He's white. They're all kind of native Mexicans, I guess would be the best way of putting it. Ends up talking to him, finds out that his mother was abandoned there because she actually did get pregnant, and got pregnant by his boss, and so his mother's there. She's become alcoholic, and her son is there, and he's had a very traumatized life because he's an outcast really. So his mother's told him about her society and where she comes from. He's alienated from their society and is a real pariah. And he's also been given a book. He's been given the complete works of Shakespeare and taught to read. So he knows Shakespeare inside out. And the character that's come from the UK that went there on holiday and meets him, very cynically realizes that if he brings this guy back to his civilization, not only will he get revenge on his boss, who's about to send him into exile for being too weird, and not being conditioned and not being like everybody else, but also that it will out his boss as having the very shameful thing of having fathered this child and stuff. So I say none of the characters are particularly kind of nice in this. So that's what happens. They take these people from this culture back to the UK, and there's all kinds of elements to the plot in this which I won't go into. But people find the mother absolutely disgusting because she's in this new world. Everyone's beautiful. Everyone looks young until they're about 60, and then they just die. Children are death conditioned so that they don't see anything wrong with death. So death is something that's just kind of seen as perfectly doesn't cause trauma to people. So this woman who's she's not got perfect teeth. She's a little bit plump. She's not kind of cloned effectively. They're not exactly cloned, but it's close to it. So they experience her as absolutely disgusting. Almost to induce vomiting. But her son, who they kind of like to name Mr. Savage and refer to as Mr. Savage, they're fascinated by, and he becomes a sort of object of curiosity and a kind of celebrity. Okay, so that's essentially what goes on in the story. The only likable character I find is a guy who is I think his term is director, but he's a director for Western Europe. So he's a very senior member of this culture, this society, and he meets with the Savage, Mr. Savage, and the two characters who are the oddballs, the misfits, the ones that got themselves into a whole bunch of trouble. And it looks like God knows, we're thinking as a reader, are they going to be executed? What's going to happen to them? And the guy that's in control of this whole society is the nicest guy, the most likable character out of the whole lot, and he's very erudite, and he's been reading all the books that are banned. And at the end of it, there's a big chunk of exposition. That's why I don't really think of this as like a fiction novel. You could say it's science fiction. Technically, it is. You could say it's a novel. Technically, it is. To me, I don't know. It's much more about making a point. I know science fiction very often is about satire or parody or making a political point or sending a warning or making a point, but it does feel like that comes first and kind of story comes second. I think you can almost it's almost like it's a story in inverted commas, even as you're reading it, is and the humour that comes across. The humour mainly comes across in some of the stock phrases that people use, which they've been hypnotised with in their sleep. So the exposition at the end is I think that's the kind of real denouement. There is an ending which I didn't. The ending felt like it was, had to end somehow, and that was one way of doing it. But for me, the whole purpose, the whole culmination really of the book was this exposition where the director of Western Europe, who's very senior member of this society, very high caste as they would call it. He kind of he has a very kind of cozy chat with them all. And actually kind of reveals all the rationale of like a good Bond villain that reveals the evil plan before the execution. He reveals all the rationale for why the society is the way it is. And the character from Mexico, who they call Mr. Savage, is the kind of there as very much as a somebody from a whole different perspective. So you can have this dialogue between the two extremes. So I hope I'm probably not expressing this very well, but for me it's a great book, but it's kind of it's not. I wouldn't say it's a great work of fiction. I'd say it's a great work of vision, but not a great work of fiction fiction because I think it's kind of quite clunky in many ways, and I suppose the society is quite clunky in many ways. So that's kind of interesting. So this Mr. Savage, as they call him, he's been brought up in brought up to value religion and family and true love, and all these kind of things, which are have become alien to this society. He also believes that life should have the thorns as well as the roses, to use an analogy that's mine and not in the book. So it's a very useful kind of ploy to what's the word? You know what I mean. Literary device to kind of to explain things, and for me that was the most interesting part of the book. So this director kind of gives the real history, because of course history's been expurgated and altered for the general people in society, but he knows the real history and he tells them the real history. He also reads all the banned books, and talks about how throughout history there've been wars and disease and disharmony and violence and loneliness and misery, and he's of the opinion that in this culture not only is there stability, which it's his job to kind of preserve at all costs, but everybody is happy. They are happy, but that's when then brings up the question: what is happiness? If you're living in this artificial, sterile, marshmallow, manipulated, false, drugged world, and you feel happy, is that good? Is that something that we should value and aspire to, or is there something much more honest and noble in the real world, where that has the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, which is a quote that's used because Shakespeare sort of features predominantly in this. And I was about to say something and then I went off on a tangent. So just to come full circle, the book is called Brave New World. That comes from The Tempest. Which is kind of interesting. It's two of my favourite, or the books that I find most interesting. This and What Dreams May Come, which I've talked about in other videos, come from Shakespearean quotations. But Brave New World is used in everything, isn't it? Think how many songs there are. I mean, there's Brave New World by New Model Army, there's Brave New World, which is a song in The War of the Worlds by Jeff Wayne. Lots of versions of Brave New World. It's a phrase that really resonates with people. And of course, the irony in this is it's not a brave new world, it's a very cowardly new world, where people shrink away from pain, where pain isn't allowed. Pain is just kind of masked and washed away. So this director, and this is spoilers, the creme de la creme of spoilers here. So the director of Western Europe, who's got a kind of quite an Arabic sounding name, but who's kind of narrated in very oh my boy kind of Welsh accent in the version that I watched, talks about how he was a free thinker as well, and talks about how science is repressed, as in some science is good, but we have to kind of keep a lid on most science. Religion is only really relevant for people who fear death, and they no longer fear death. And art has been castrated. Really, there's no proper art in this world. It's all very facile stuff. And he's talking about how you can't have true art in a world where there is no conflict, where there's no tension, there's no pain. It just doesn't work. So this is a world where everybody's happy. But there's no proper art, there's no heroism, there's no religion, there's no real science, no quest for truth in terms of science. Science has been used to create this utopia, but they don't want they don't want people kind of getting hold of scientific truths. So he actually reveals that he was a physicist and he got busted for doing real science. And he got the option of being sent to an island, which sounds terrible. In the beginning of the book, they talk about, we're going to send you to an island, you're going to send you to somewhere remote and horrible. But actually, that's where they send all the free thinkers, and they let them get on with it there. So it's not like this horrible punishment. They're actually just... So in a way, it's a very kind world, whereas the world of the... indigenous people and the real people and the people who haven't been civilized is quite a harsh world in lots of ways. So the end of the story really is, so this director is the most likable character in the book, who knows Shakespeare and who knows the Bible and is quoting all these passages of literature, and has basically said that he had the choice of going to an island himself or becoming a regional director. And he kind of said he chose the latter, not for his own happiness but for other people's happiness. So he is another misfit character, and he only finds a place because he understands the rationale for this world, and although he can see through the illusion and therefore potentially arguably isn't happy himself, although I guess if he takes enough of this drug, this soma, he will be. He has kind of achieved a sense of purpose, I guess, by his passion for maintaining the stability of this world where nobody suffers and everybody's happy. So he's like the guardian of happiness, but not quite. He knows too much to be happy himself. So what a fascinating novel, really. Now, was Huxley right in his sense of that's the way the world is going? Interesting. I'd be really interested in your thoughts on this. Maybe yes, maybe no. I think certainly in a much more subtle way, in the way that there are so many things in society that dumb people down. So there, I always think when I go past a newsagent, it always kind of tickles me, especially when you see things listed on the outside what the newsagents sell, because they usually say alcohol, tobacco, lottery, pornography. They never say pornography, but they sell pornography. Sweets, caffeine. They're all things that dumb us down. Even the non-pornographic magazines, there's celebrity gossip, all these things that kind of dumb us down. Is that part of the brave new world? Is that part of? And then there's is this tinfoil hat or not? I don't know. The thing about fluoride in the water, does that make us more compliant? So is this really happening? Is this are we programmed behaviourally? Are we conditioned? And if so, by whom and how and to what end? But very interesting. The other thing that I find fascinating about the book is that the character names and the main characters and ancillary names, there's a lot of references to communism. So there's a character called Lenina, which obviously to do with Lenin, and another character is Marx. But also they replaced the word God or Lord with Ford, and they kind of Henry Ford has become this kind of God surrogate kind of character. So it's almost like they've kind of deified elements of both communism and capitalism in creating this utopia type society. Or to a good phrase that I'd use from a song, an All About Eve song, it's an underhand kind of wonderland. So it's and it just raises all these questions, doesn't it? If you could by some kind of benign dictatorial way control people, knowing that it would make them happy, would that be the right thing to do? Do people and one of the phrases that's used in the book is, do people have the right? Should people have the right to be unhappy? It's interesting in the American constitutional thing, isn't it? That says, the right to pursue happiness. So do we have the right to unhappiness if we so choose it? Very, very interesting concept. Like I say, not I think the best piece of literature. It's a good read, but it's for somebody that, very much like the society that he's envisaging. There's a purpose, and the purpose of the message that they're trying to put across, I think, is more important than the art of the novel writing. And you might disagree with me on that. I hope you do, and we can have a good discussion about that. So any comments, any thoughts, especially if you disagree, but be polite, because it's supposed to be fun. It's too much on social media. People be rude to each other when they disagree. What's the point of that? We're here to have a good time. Or are we? Why are we here? That's one of the things that the novel looks at. So I have said enough. I'm sure to have missed off some of the main points. So take a look in the description box, because in a couple of days I'll think, hang on a minute, I meant to mention this, I meant to mention that, and I didn't. So have a look in there. And thank you for watching. Rangimarie.